Marcus was only 17, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had grown up around airplanes. Since childhood, airports felt like a second home to him. While other kids were fascinated by video games or sports, Marcus had always been fascinated by the sight of aircrafts rising into the sky. He had spent many days visiting his mother's office at the airline, watching how flights were prepared and crews worked together. But despite all this, to most people at the airport that morning, Marcus looked like just another teenager traveling alone. It was a bright Saturday morning when he arrived at the busy terminal. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air, luggage wheels clicked across the shiny floor, and announcements echoed over the speakers. Marcus walked with his backpack slung over his shoulder and a boarding pass carefully tucked inside. He had come early, as his mother always taught him, better to wait a little than to rush at the last moment. Marcus was excited about his trip. It was just a short domestic flight, but to him, every trip felt like an adventure. He moved toward the gate area and paused near a window, watching planes taxi on the runway. He loved the way their wings glistened in the sun. His eyes followed one jet taking off, and he whispered to himself, "One day, I'll be up there in the cockpit." While Marcus stood there, a man in uniform approached from the other side of the terminal. Captain Harris, a senior pilot with years of flying experience, was preparing for his own flight. He carried himself with pride, chest out, his crisp white shirt decorated with golden stripes on the shoulders. He believed he knew everything about how an airport should look, how crew should act, and who belonged where. When his eyes fell on Marcus standing near the restricted crew area, his mind quickly drew its own conclusions. To Harris, Marcus didn't look like a passenger. His casual clothes, his young age, and the way he lingered near the gate gave the pilot an uneasy feeling. Instead of asking Marcus directly or checking his pass, Harris frowned and muttered to himself, "What is this kid doing here?" He slowed his pace, observing from a distance, convinced that Marcus was somewhere he shouldn't be. Minutes passed. Passengers walked by with no concern, but Harris's suspicion grew stronger. His thoughts raced, what if this boy was up to something? Why is he alone? Why is he hanging around the crew entrance? These questions turned into assumptions, and assumptions turned into judgment. Finally, Harris took out his phone and called airport security. He lowered his voice but spoke firmly, "There's someone near the crew gate who doesn't belong. A teenager. Might need checking." The security guard on the other end noted the concern and promised to send someone. Not satisfied, Harris then went further. He called the local police stationed at the airport. His tone carried authority, "I believe there may be a suspicious individual near the boarding area. Please send officers immediately." Meanwhile, Marcus had no idea what storm was quietly building behind him. He had found an empty seat near the large glass wall and pulled out his phone, texting a friend about his upcoming trip. A smile played on his lips as he imagined the fun awaiting him at his destination. To him, this was just another smooth morning at the airport. But soon, he noticed two uniformed security guards walking in his direction. They scanned the area and locked eyes on him. Their expressions were serious, their steps purposeful. Marcus straightened in his seat, confused as they stopped right in front of him. "Excuse me, young man," one of them said firmly, "can we see your boarding pass?" Startled, Marcus quickly reached into his pocket and handed it over. "Sure, is something wrong?" he asked, his voice polite but nervous. The guards exchanged glances. The pass was valid, clearly showing his name and flight details. Yet instead of easing, their suspicion deepened. "Where are your parents?" the other guard asked. Marcus hesitated. "I'm traveling alone. I'm 17. "That's allowed," he said softly. The guards studied him for another moment, their eyes narrowing. They didn't return his pass. Instead, one of them stepped aside and spoke into his radio, calling for further confirmation. Within minutes, Two police officers arrived, their dark uniforms and stern expressions attracting attention from nearby passengers. People started whispering, turning their heads toward the scene. Marcus felt his heart beat faster. He looked around, embarrassed by the unwanted attention. All he had wanted was a peaceful flight, but now it seemed everyone's eyes were on him. The police officer spoke in a commanding tone, "Son, stand up. We need to ask you a few questions." Marcus stood, his hands trembling slightly, though he tried to stay calm. I don't understand," he stammered. "I already showed my boarding pass." But the officer didn't seem interested in explanations. Instead, he asked, "Why were you standing near the crew gate? That's not a place for passengers." Marcus blinked, shocked by the question. "I was just looking at the planes," he explained honestly. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." Still, the officer's expression didn't soften. He motioned for Marcus to move aside, away from the waiting area. A small crowd was beginning to gather, whispering among themselves. Some looked concerned, others simply curious. To Marcus, every glance felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him. For the first time that morning, Marcus felt completely out of place in the very environment he loved most. He swallowed hard, wishing his mother were there. He wanted her calm presence, her steady voice. But she wasn't there yet. At that moment, it was just him, standing under the cold gaze of officers and strangers, wondering what had gone so terribly wrong. And from a short distance away, Captain Harris watched the scene unfold, arms crossed. To him, everything seemed justified. In his mind, he had prevented a possible problem. He didn't think twice about the fear written on the young boy's face. Marcus stood silently as questions continued to come his way, each one sounding less like curiosity and more like suspicion. Inside, he wondered, "Why me? What did I do wrong?" But no one gave him an answer. That morning, what began as an exciting trip for Marcus was quickly turning into one of the most confusing and humiliating experiences of his young life. And though he didn't know it yet, the arrival of his mother would soon change everything. Marcus stood in front of the two police officers, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. He felt his throat go dry as the stares of strangers burned into his back. The airport, which had always been a place of wonder and excitement for him, now felt like a stage where he was the unwilling actor in a drama he did not understand. "Tell us again," one officer said, his voice firm, "why were you standing near the crew gate?" Marcus's voice wavered, though he tried his best to speak clearly. "I wasn't near it. I was just standing by the window, looking at the planes. I like watching them take off." The officer frowned, not satisfied with the answer. "You didn't have any business there. Most people don't hang around that area." Marcus's heart sank. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," he repeated, a little louder this time. His eyes searched their faces, hoping to find even a hint of understanding. But all he saw was cold suspicion. The security guards had still not returned his boarding pass. It was in their hands, and Marcus felt stripped of his proof of belonging. Without it, he felt powerless. He thought of reaching out to grab it back, but he knew that would only make things worse. So he stood there, waiting, feeling smaller by the second. Around him, more people had started to gather. Some whispered quietly, others openly pointed at him. A few shook their heads, as though they already believed he had done something wrong. The eyes of strangers made Marcus's face burn with embarrassment. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and escape from the crowd. He remembered his mother's advice, "Stay calm, Marcus. Never raise your voice when someone challenges you. Speak clearly, and always keep your dignity." He tried to follow her words now, but inside, he felt crushed. One officer pulled out a notepad. "Name?" he asked. "Marcus Johnson," he answered quickly. "Age?" 17. The officer scribbled something down and looked up again. Where are you traveling today? Marcus swallowed hard. To Dallas. I have my boarding pass. It's right there in his hand. He pointed to the guard, who still held it tightly. The officer raised an eyebrow and glanced at the guard. The guard nodded slowly, confirming the pass was indeed real. But instead of handing it back, the guard said, maybe someone else bought it for him. We can't just assume everything's fine. Marcus's chest tightened. Why are they treating me like this? He thought. Why can't they believe me? The second officer leaned closer, lowering his voice. Do your parents know you're here? Are you traveling with permission? Yes, of course, Marcus said, his voice sharp with hurt. My mom knows everything. She booked my ticket herself. I don't understand why this is happening. But his words seemed to bounce off them like pebbles against a wall. The first officer sighed, then looked toward Captain Harris, who stood nearby, arms folded across his chest. You're the one who reported this. Yes, Harris said firmly. His voice carried confidence, as if his judgment was beyond question. I saw him hanging around the crew entrance. He didn't look like a passenger to me. Better safe than sorry, right? The officers nodded slightly, as though the pilot's word was evidence enough. Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to speak, to tell them that it wasn't fair, that he had done nothing wrong. But when he opened his mouth, no words came out. His throat ached, his voice stuck in his chest. The humiliation was heavy, like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. A little girl holding her mother's hand tugged and whispered, Mommy, why are they taking that boy away? The mother shushed her and guided her toward the gate, glancing back at Marcus with pity in her eyes. That look pierced Marcus deeply. He didn't want pity. He wanted to be seen for who he was, a normal teenager, a passenger with the right to be there. The officers motioned for him to step aside, away from the crowd. We'll need to verify your information, one said. Marcus walked slowly, his backpack bouncing lightly against his back, every step feeling heavier than the last. They stopped near a wall, away from the flow of travelers. Still, people turned their heads to watch. The whispers never stopped. He tried to distract himself by thinking of happier memories, watching planes with his mother, listening to her stories about running the airline, dreaming of becoming a pilot one day. But those warm thoughts were quickly replaced by the sting of the present moment. Do you have any ID? The officer asked. Marcus nodded quickly and pulled out his wallet. He handed over his student ID and waited while they studied it. High school, the officer muttered, glancing at the card. He then looked back at Marcus. You sure you're supposed to be traveling alone? Marcus almost laughed out of frustration, though no sound escaped. Yes, he said firmly this time. Lots of teenagers travel alone. I'm not the first. The officer raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The silence stretched painfully. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, one of the officers spoke into his radio, calling for confirmation of Marcus's ticket. Marcus stood stiffly, his arms folded now, trying to keep himself from trembling. He didn't want them to see how shaken he was. The call took only minutes, but to Marcus, it felt endless. He stared at the floor, at the reflection of lights on the polished tiles, refusing to look up at the faces around him. He knew they were still staring, still whispering. When the officer finally ended the call, he nodded slowly. The ticket checks out, he admitted. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. The officer still didn't apologize. Instead, he said, you'll need to wait here until we're certain everything is in order. Marcus's relief turned into anger. What more do they want? He thought bitterly. He looked around, wishing again for his mother's presence. She would know what to say. She would know how to end this unfair treatment. The minutes dragged on. Marcus stood silently, staring out the window once more, but this time his joy in the airplanes was gone. They no longer looked like symbols of freedom. They looked distant, unreachable, like dreams being pulled away from him. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. He didn't want anyone to see him cry. Not the police, not the guards, not the passengers. He would not give them that satisfaction. But inside, Marcus's heart ached. For the first time, he felt unwelcome in a world he had always loved. And somewhere deep inside, he made a quiet promise to himself, this moment would not break him. What Marcus didn't know was that his mother was already on her way. And when she arrived, the story that humiliated him would take a turn that no one in the airport could have imagined. The officers stood with crossed arms, their radios crackling softly as the minutes ticked by. Marcus remained against the wall, his backpack still slung over his shoulder, his heart heavy with a mix of confusion and frustration. Every time he looked toward the crowd, he noticed people staring and whispering, some even shaking their heads as if they had already judged him. He kept his eyes down to avoid their looks. The hum of the airport continued around them. Announcements echoed through the loudspeakers, calling passengers to their gates. Families hurried past with suitcases, businessmen tapped quickly on their phones, and children laughed as they rolled their toy bags. To all of them, Marcus was just a scene on the side, something unusual to glance at before returning to their own journeys. But to Marcus, the moments felt endless, stretching on like an unfair spotlight shining on him. Then, suddenly, there was the sound of confident footsteps approaching. The clicking of heels against the polished floor echoed through the terminal. It was a sound Marcus knew well. He looked up quickly, his eyes widening with both relief and surprise. His mother, Evelyn Johnson, was striding toward them. She carried herself with quiet power, her presence commanding respect even before she spoke. She wore a tailored suit, her hair neatly tied back, and her sharp eyes moved swiftly from her son to the officers standing around him. "Marcus," she said firmly but calmly, her voice steady as always. "What's going on here?" Marcus's chest tightened with emotion. He wanted to run to her, to explain everything, but the words stuck in his throat. He simply looked at her with wide, pleading eyes. One of the officers stepped forward, speaking before Marcus could. "Ma'am, your son was found near the restricted crew entrance. He didn't appear to belong there. We had to investigate." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the officer, then to the guard still holding her son's boarding pass. Her face remained calm, but her tone carried authority. "Is that his boarding pass you're holding?" she asked. "Yes," the guard admitted. "Then why is he being treated like a criminal instead of a passenger?" she asked sharply, her voice firm enough to silence the surrounding whispers. The officer shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond immediately. Evelyn stepped closer to Marcus, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "My son has every right to be here," she continued. "And unless you can prove otherwise, I expect you to return his boarding pass and apologize." Before the officer could reply, Captain Harris walked forward, clearing his throat. His face carried the same stern look he had worn earlier. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice calm but edged with confidence. "I was the one who reported him. He was lingering near the crew gate, and it didn't look right to me. In my experience, it's better to raise concerns than ignore them." Evelyn turned to face him. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "And did you speak to him before calling security? Did you ask to see his pass? Did you give him even one chance to explain himself?" Harris hesitated. The silence stretched, and a faint murmur rose among the passengers watching. "No," he finally admitted. "I trusted my instincts." Evelyn's voice grew sharper, though she remained composed. "Your instincts led you to call the police on a teenager who was doing nothing but waiting for his flight. Do you realize the humiliation you've caused him? The officer looked from Evelyn to Harris, suddenly unsure of where this confrontation was headed. The crowd leaned in closer, drawn by the tension. Marcus stood quietly by his mother's side, feeling a rush of relief at her words. For the first time that morning, he no longer felt alone. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if we could just—" But Evelyn raised her hand, stopping him. "Do you know who I am?" she asked calmly, her voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced the terminal. The officers exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Harris frowned, clearly irritated by her question. "And who exactly are you?" he asked. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. From it, she removed an ID card with the airline's logo printed boldly across the top. She handed it to the officer nearest her. "My name is Evelyn Johnson," she said firmly. "I am the owner and CEO of this airline." The officer's eyes widened as he studied the card. His posture immediately shifted, stiff with realization. He handed it back carefully, almost nervously. The second officer leaned in for a quick look, his expression mirroring shock. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Gasps echoed from passengers who had overheard. Harris blinked in disbelief. His confident expression faltered. You're the owner," he stammered. "Yes," Evelyn replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "And you just accused the son of the airline's owner of trespassing in his own terminal." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The officers shifted uncomfortably, the guards lowered their eyes, and the passengers whispered louder, shaking their heads at the unfolding scene. Marcus stood taller now, not out of pride but because he finally felt shielded. His mother's presence, her calm but firm authority, was like a wall of protection. Evelyn looked directly at Harris, her voice steady but firm. "My son is not a threat. He is a passenger. And your assumptions today have shown more about your prejudice than about his actions." Harris opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. For the first time, he looked unsure, even embarrassed. Evelyn turned back to the officers. "Return his boarding pass immediately," she ordered. The guard who had been holding it all along quickly stepped forward, handing it back with trembling fingers. Marcus took it quietly, gripping it tightly in his hand as if it were his shield. "Now," Evelyn continued, her voice calm but cutting, "I would like to know how you plan to correct the embarrassment you've caused my son in front of this entire terminal." Neither officer answered right away. Their faces were flushed, their confidence shaken. Harris stood behind them, silent, his eyes lowered. The crowd remained hushed, watching closely. Some passengers even pulled out their phones, recording the moment. Others nodded in quiet approval at Evelyn's strength. For Marcus, the shift was overwhelming. Just moments ago, he had been standing alone, stripped of dignity, surrounded by suspicion. Now, with his mother by his side, the same officers and guards who had doubted him were at a loss for words. He felt pride swell in his chest, not because of his mother's title, but because of the way she stood for him with calm, with dignity, and with power that came not from anger, but from truth. And though the situation was not over, the tide had turned. What began as humiliation was slowly transforming into a lesson not just for Marcus, but for everyone watching. The air in the terminal had changed. What had begun as a tense and humiliating confrontation had transformed into an unexpected spectacle. Passengers who had been quietly whispering now leaned forward, curious, some even holding their phones, recording the unfolding events. Marcus stood close to his mother, his heart still racing but now filled with a sense of relief. He could feel her calm strength wrapping around him, steadying his nerves. Evelyn Johnson didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch just enough for the seriousness of the moment to settle over everyone present. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the scene. She looked first at the officers, then at the security guards, and finally at Captain Harris. Each of them felt the weight of her gaze. There was no anger in her tone yet, only an unmistakable expectation that the truth would be acknowledged. "Now," Evelyn began, her voice firm but composed, "I want to make one thing very clear. My son, Marcus, is a passenger on this airline, booked through our system, and has every right to be in this terminal." She paused, letting the words sink in. Around them, murmurs grew louder. Passengers glanced at their phones, checking details. Some began to whisper in disbelief, clearly astonished that the teenager being questioned was the son of the airline's owner. Harris, the pilot, shifted uneasily. He tried to find his usual confidence, but the authority emanating from Evelyn left him momentarily speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling to justify his actions. Evelyn took a step closer to Marcus, her hand lightly resting on his shoulder. "Marcus," she said softly, "you did nothing wrong. It is the assumptions of others that have caused this situation. And assumptions, no matter how well intended they may seem, are dangerous when they are based on appearances rather than facts." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He had spent the past hour feeling powerless, embarrassed, and isolated. But hearing his mother speak in that calm, unwavering voice made him feel seen and protected. He nodded silently, grateful that she had arrived when she did. Evelyn turned back to the officers. "I expect a full acknowledgement of what has happened here," she said. "An apology to my son, not only for the humiliation but for the failure to follow proper procedure. Protocol exists for a reason. It should be applied fairly to everyone, regardless of appearance or age." One officer hesitated, glancing at his colleague. The other nodded slowly. "Ma'am," one of them began, "we apologize for the misunderstanding. We should have verified his credentials before escalating the situation." Marcus watched, astonished. It was one thing to have his mother intervene, but hearing the officers admit their mistake in front of the crowd was another entirely. His embarrassment began to shift toward relief and even pride. Harris, still standing slightly apart, finally found his voice. "Ma'am," he said, his tone uncertain, I only acted on what I thought was the right course. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Evelyn's eyes remained calm, though her voice carried quiet authority. "Captain Harris, intent does not excuse impact. Your actions caused unnecessary fear and humiliation to a minor who was completely innocent. I hope this serves as a reminder to examine assumptions before acting, especially when the consequences can be so harmful." The words were measured but cutting, and Harris swallowed hard, feeling the weight of embarrassment pressing down on him. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her point, though his pride was clearly bruised. Around them, passengers whispered among themselves. Some clapped quietly, others murmured words of approval. The mood in the terminal had shifted completely. What had started as a tense confrontation had now become a moment of reflection for everyone present. Evelyn turned back to Marcus, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "You handled yourself well, Marcus," she said. "Even under pressure, you stayed calm and honest. That is something to be proud of." Marcus felt warmth spread through him. All the humiliation of the past hour, the whispers, the stares, the confusion, everything seemed to melt away under his mother's words. He straightened his posture, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. Evelyn then addressed the entire crowd. "Let this be a lesson for everyone here. We must never judge someone based on their appearance or assumptions. Everyone deserves respect, and fairness must guide our actions. Prejudice, even unintentional, can have serious consequences." Passengers nodded, some whispering agreements. A few approached Marcus afterward, offering kind words and support, which helped restore his confidence further. Even the officers and security personnel looked more thoughtful, clearly reflecting on what had just happened. Harris, finally able to speak without hesitation, addressed Marcus directly. "Marcus, I'm sorry for the way I acted. I should have asked questions before assuming anything." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology, though he still felt a mix of emotions. The sting of earlier humiliation lingered, but it was tempered by the support of his mother and the acknowledgement from the pilot and officers. Evelyn spoke once more, her tone firm but composed. "Captain Harris, I trust this experience will remind you that responsibility comes with observation, not assumption. And to all here, let us remember that respect and fairness are not optional, they are essential." With that, the tension in the terminal slowly began to dissipate. Marcus felt lighter than he had all morning. The weight of humiliation, confusion, and fear was gradually replaced by relief and empowerment. He realized that even in moments of doubt and unfair treatment, truth and calm authority could shift the tide completely. The officers stepped aside, allowing Marcus to move freely. The security guards returned to their posts, a little more careful and reflective than before. Harris, still uneasy, remained nearby but kept a respectful distance. Evelyn guided Marcus toward the boarding gate, her hand on his back. "Come on," she said softly. "Your flight is waiting, and it's time to put this behind us." Marcus followed, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. He had been tested in a way he never expected, but with his mother by his side, he had endured the ordeal and come out stronger. As they approached the gate, Marcus glanced around the terminal. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation were now returning to their own journeys, many with a new perspective on assumptions and respect. The atmosphere, once tense, now felt lighter, more understanding. Marcus took a deep breath and turned to his mother. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled. "You didn't need me, Marcus. You were honest and brave the whole time. But I'm glad I was here to help set things right." He nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude and admiration. Not only for her presence but for the way she had handled the situation with dignity and authority. It was a lesson he would remember forever, not just about fairness, but about courage, composure, and the power of standing up for what is right. As they approached the boarding gate, the morning sunlight streaming through the large terminal windows, Marcus realized that what had begun as an embarrassing and unfair confrontation had transformed into an unforgettable lesson. A lesson in integrity, justice, and the strength of calm, confident authority. And for the first time that morning, Marcus smiled freely again, looking forward to his flight not just as a passenger, but as someone who had experienced a moment of growth and understanding that he would carry with him for life. After the confrontation at the airport, Marcus and his mother finally made their way to the boarding gate. The tension that had hung over him all morning had begun to lift, replaced by a sense of relief and empowerment. The experience had been frightening and humiliating, but it had also taught him an unforgettable lesson about courage, fairness, and the importance of standing up for oneself. Evelyn held his hand gently as they walked. "How are you feeling now, Marcus?" she asked softly, her voice calm and comforting. Marcus thought for a moment. "I feel better. But I still can't believe how quickly things went wrong. One minute, I was excited for my flight, and the next, everything changed." Evelyn nodded, understanding his emotions completely. "Yes, it can feel overwhelming when people judge without knowing the full story. But remember, you stayed calm and honest throughout. That's what matters most. Your actions reflected who you truly are." Marcus looked at his mother with admiration. He had always respected her as a strong leader and an intelligent businesswoman, but seeing her handle the situation with such poise and authority made him see her in a new light. She wasn't just his mother, she was someone who could face unfairness head-on and correct it without losing her composure. As they approached the gate, a few passengers who had witnessed the incident came forward. Some offered quiet apologies to Marcus for the uncomfortable attention he had received. Others expressed admiration for the way he had remained composed, and many commented on the admirable way his mother had handled the situation. Marcus nodded politely, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. The airline staff, who had been watching the incident unfold, were clearly shaken by what had happened. They approached Evelyn with concern, but also with respect. "Miss Johnson," one of them said, "we're so sorry this happened. We'll make sure it never happens again. Your son shouldn't have been treated like that." Evelyn smiled slightly, appreciative but firm. "Thank you. But it's not enough to apologize quietly. This incident is a lesson for everyone here, including you. We must ensure that all passengers are treated fairly, with respect, and without assumptions based on appearance, age, or any other factor." Back in the terminal, Captain Harris had been quietly reflecting on what had happened. His initial certainty about Marcus's intentions had been shattered. The realization that he had misjudged a young passenger, and that the boy's mother was the airline owner, left him feeling embarrassed and chastised. He knew that his actions, though unintentional, had caused harm and humiliation. He approached Evelyn, his voice hesitant. "Miss Johnson, I want to apologize again for my actions. I acted on assumptions, and I understand now how wrong that was. I'll make sure to learn from this experience." Evelyn nodded, her eyes calm but firm. "Captain Harris, recognizing your mistake is the first step. But actions speak louder than words. Moving forward, you must ensure that assumptions do not guide your decisions, especially when they affect others unfairly." Harris lowered his head, humbled by her words. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his career, a reminder that fairness and respect must always come first. Meanwhile, Marcus and Evelyn reached their boarding gate. Marcus showed his boarding pass to the staff and prepared to board the plane. He felt lighter now, almost as if a burden had been lifted. The earlier fear and humiliation were still present in memory, but they were overshadowed by the sense of empowerment he now carried. As Marcus settled into his seat on the plane, he reflected on the morning's events. He realized that life sometimes places obstacles in front of us, even when we have done nothing wrong. But how we respond to those obstacles defines us. Staying calm, honest, and composed, even in the face of unfairness, allows us to preserve our dignity and integrity. Evelyn sat next to him briefly before returning to her own responsibilities at the airport. "Remember, Marcus," she said gently, "this is a moment you'll carry with you. Not just because it was challenging, but because it showed you the power of truth, patience, and standing strong when others act unfairly." Marcus nodded, absorbing every word. He understood now that this experience, while difficult, had strengthened him. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the ability to remain calm and truthful even when fear and confusion surround you. Back on the ground, the airline issued an official statement regarding the incident. It acknowledged the misunderstanding, condemned the unfair treatment of Marcus, and reinforced the company's commitment to fairness, respect, and anti-discrimination practices. The statement served as both an apology and a reminder to employees and the public that assumptions must never replace facts. In the days following the incident, Marcus's story spread through social media and news outlets. Many people expressed support for him and admiration for Evelyn's leadership. The story resonated with countless individuals who had experienced or witnessed similar situations of unfair treatment. It sparked conversations about respect, assumptions, and fairness in public spaces, including airports and other industries. Marcus, though initially uncomfortable with the attention, began to see the positive impact of what had happened. His experience, while personal and difficult, had become a teaching moment for others. He realized that sometimes, challenges can have unexpected benefits. They can inspire change, awareness, and understanding. As he continued his flight and looked out the window at the clouds below, Marcus felt a sense of hope. The fear and embarrassment of the morning were fading, replaced by confidence in his ability to face challenges and remain true to himself. He knew that life would continue to present difficulties, but he also knew that with honesty, composure, and support from loved ones, he could overcome them. Evelyn, observing her son from a distance, felt a quiet pride. She knew that this incident, while upsetting, had taught Marcus lessons that no classroom could offer. It had shown him the importance of integrity, the power of calm authority, and the value of standing firm in the face of unfairness. The airline, too, benefited from the experience. Policies were reviewed and reinforced, ensuring that employees would think twice before making assumptions about passengers. Training programs were updated to include sensitivity and fairness, emphasizing that every individual deserves respect regardless of age, appearance, or circumstances. In the end, the incident became a turning point not just for Marcus, but for everyone involved. It was a reminder that assumptions can be dangerous, that humility and reflection are necessary when mistakes are made, and that fairness and respect are principles worth defending. Marcus stepped off the plane at his destination feeling stronger and wiser than when he had boarded. He knew that the events of that morning would stay with him forever, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of the strength he had discovered within himself. He had faced fear, embarrassment, and misunderstanding, and he had come through it with courage and dignity. As he walked through the terminal at his destination, Marcus thought about the lessons he had learned. He thought about the importance of staying calm, being honest, and trusting in the truth. He thought about the power of having someone stand for you, and the impact one person can have when they act with integrity and fairness. And most importantly, he understood that this experience had prepared him for life. It had taught him to face challenges with patience, strength, and confidence, and to always remember that dignity and honesty can turn even the most difficult moments into opportunities for growth and understanding.